All right, Dan, we said it. It is officially the off season. We're going to break down our New York Mets, and nice enough to do that with us. He covers the New York Mets and Major League Baseball for Newsday. You can read all of his coverage at newsday.com, and certainly a friend of the drive, and that is our guy, Tim Healey. Tim, how are you, sir?
I am excellent, thanks. How are you?
We're good. I mean, it's the off season, so fun. It's the best time to be a Met fan, isn't it? Right? For me, I've always loved November. Hope is eternal. It's so great. We've got probably going to have a new manager. Well, we are this time. It's like every November we get a new manager, basically. It's been an interesting season. Before we get to that, I saw. Are you running the New York City Marathon?
I am, yep.
Wow.
Just 2 days away. I'm pretty amped.
That is awesome. So how long have you been training for that?
The training program I did was 4 months. So my first training runs were actually in Phoenix and San Diego when the Mets were there for that last week before the All-Star break.
That sounds awful.
So it's been a good build since then, and I'm feeling good and strong going into Sunday morning.
That's awesome. That's terrific. Are you running for a charity?
I am, yeah. I've been raising money for Samaritans of New York, which is a suicide prevention and education organization here in New York City. So anybody who wants to learn more about that or potentially donate, the link is in my bio on Twitter.
Okay.
And I've tweeted it a bunch of times, so folks can go check that out if they're so inclined.
All right, so go to Tim B. Healey on Twitter, and you'll see the link right there in his bio. It says Samaritan right there, and you can click on that and donate. Very cool, Tim. We are rooting for you, and we think that's like the coolest thing in the world. So congratulations even before you get going.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's definitely cool. All right, let's start with the Mets, and let's start at the top. October 2nd, David Stearns takes the wheel of the Mets. Days later, Billy Epler's gone. I wasn't shocked by that. But at any rate, the Mets organization, do you see the front office? How do you see the front office operating differently under David Stearns?
Well, it's hard to tell because we haven't seen David Stearns do anything yet. He's here. He inherited a motley crew of a senior level front office, people hired by his various predecessors. There are Sandy Alderson people, Jared Porter, Zach Scott people, Billy Epler people. So we still have to wait and see what David Stearns is going to do to shape the front office as he sees fit. Inevitably, there will be probably a couple of high-level inner circle front office hires he has to make. The Mets need somebody to run player development, which is very, very important, and they need somebody to run pro scouting, which is very important. And the player development hire in particular is critical because the Mets, for all their chaos and turnover over the last 5 to 7 years, the player development role is very much included. They have had like 5 different people in charge of that department in 6 or 7 seasons. So they need stability there as well as stability overall. So David Stearns is going to have a chance to make his mark. We don't know yet what that quite is going to look like, especially on the player acquisition and money spending front, but we'll find out shortly.
Quickly on the player development front before we move on to the many pressing issues, is it fair to say that the Mets haven't had the infrastructure or the personnel to be able to properly develop these younger guys? Because you kind of get in a stretch where you get a couple of these high level prospects, guys like Alonso and McNeil, who come through, but maybe not as many who are joining them. So is that an organizational change that you see that might need to happen?
They have had some infrastructure in recent years, but the problem is you hire. Let's go back to Brody Van Wagenen, who I didn't even mention when I was rattling off all the previous other GMs a minute ago. He comes in, he hires a guy named Jared Banner to run player development. Jared, of course, then hires his people, his pitching coordinator, his hitting coordinator, and all of these people have philosophies and systems. And in theory, in the player development department, a teenager enters the Mets system in Port St. Lucie and learns how the Mets as an organization feel about hitting, about pitching, about whatever it may be, and then they filter up through the system, learning the same lessons, hearing the same language, things like that, and everybody's on the same page because the GM hired his player development guy, and the player development guy hired his sub-leaders, so to speak. And then after 2 years, boom, regime change, all that is over. And when that happens over and over and over constantly, the player development leader tries to implement his systems and philosophies, but then it doesn't take root and it doesn't take effect and it doesn't yield fruit because it turns over so quickly.
Right.
Because as we know, it takes 3, 4, 5 years for that teenager to rise up and become a major leaguer. So the fact that Francisco Alvarez, for example, signed with the Mets in, I want to say 2017, maybe 2018, he was in the minors or in the farm system for 4 or 5 years and had about that many player development leaders that he was playing under in that time.
Right.
So he obviously is an aberration in a lot of ways and is a freak of nature and very good and excelled and overcame whatever hurdles that existed. But as we've seen, the Mets farm system-wise have not been the most productive between the Alonso McNeil rookie years and then Alvarez, Beatty, Vientos kind of this wave. So it's been a cold stretch for the Mets player development-wise.
We're hanging out with our guy, Tim Healey. He covers the New York Mets and Major League Baseball for Newsday. Read all of his coverage at newsday.com. You can certainly follow him on Twitter at Tim B. Healey. And every once in a while, he's nice enough to join us here on The Drive. All right, Buck was shown the door. Really not surprised at that Stearns wants to bring in his own guy. Do you see it being Craig Counsell? And if it's not Craig Counsell, who do you think realistically will be the next manager of the Mets?
Well, it might be Craig Counsell, and I think the Mets will want it to be Craig Counsell. But what we don't know is if Craig Counsell wants it to be Craig Counsell. This is a guy who is basically the most coveted managerial free agent since Joe Madden a couple of times.
Yeah.
And before that, I couldn't even tell you when there was a manager who was desired like this. So it's a big deal, and it's going to be the first big domino to fall in the offseason for a couple of teams. Mets involved, of course. Council's also talked to the Guardians, and naturally the Brewers want to retain Craig Counsell. So I don't know when Craig Counsell is going to make his decision, but it feasibly could come any time now. If it's not Craig Counsell for the Mets, the other guy we know they've talked to multiple times is Carlos Mendoza, who is the Yankees bench coach.
Yep.
And from what I can gather, talking to people who know him, is pretty well-liked, well-regarded, respected by Yankees players, others in the clubhouse, things like that. He never played in the majors, played in the minors for about a decade, and then got into coaching with the Yankees. And what's interesting is that the Yankees, of course, are a very analytical organization. He first, after coaching in the minors for a long time, Mendoza first joined the Yankees big league staff as what is called a quality control coach or a quality assurance coach. And that is sort of a nebulous title, but basically what it means for a lot of teams is they are the conduit between the front office and the dugout, the coaching staff, whatever.
Yeah.
Making sure that analytics, one, makes sense to people, and two, are being used in a way that is logical and appropriate. So Mendoza did that for a couple of years, then became the Yankees bench coach, and here we are. He's something of a hotshot managerial prospect. Talked to the Giants, talked to the Guardians, talked to other teams in the past, Red Sox, Tigers. So sounds like Carlos Mendoza is going to be a manager somewhere at some point, and maybe that will be with the Mets right now. Who knows?
Wow. Interesting. I mean, I was looking back at the ejection numbers. He has plenty of experience taking over for Aaron Boone over the last couple of years. So he's got the experience on the resume if he hasn't done it at a full-time manner. But aside from that, and just in your dealings with this group, being around them during the last couple of seasons, are there any specific characteristics of the new manager that you think you would want to see from the new guy that maybe Buck Showalter didn't bring on a daily basis?
That's a great question. And the answer is, honestly, not a good answer, but the answer is not really. I don't think there are any characteristics.
Okay.
It's about, as much as the in-game stuff gets critiqued, and you need to have your ducks in a row there for sure, especially in New York, where every decision, right or wrong, will be criticized, even when it works out, as recent previous managers in New York have learned. It's about managing people and managing humans, managing egos. So I think Buck really prided himself on being able to work the clubhouse. And, he would say all the time, he walks through twice a day, once early in the afternoon and once after the game. And he doesn't have an agenda did not have an agenda when he went into the clubhouse, but it would always come out learning something new about where his players and where his people were at mentally. So let's be honest, the modern major league manager needs to be well-versed in the technology and philosophies and the analytics and all that stuff that guide front offices. So that's going to be important, certainly in David Stearns' eyes, when he's choosing his guy and his partner, as he called it, somebody he can grow with. But let's not forget the human side of it.
Yeah.
You need to be able to, the job is literally called manager. You have to be able to manage people. That's true in baseball. It's true in any industry.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And Stearns is going to have to make a quick decision, because what he doesn't want to end up with is the best manager available is the guy you just fired. You know what I mean? Because and not that he would ever go back that way, but the Mets could end up in a situation where, geez, we're looking for a guy like Buck, and they'll never admit that, and they'll never go back that way. But those things always they always worry me in this. All right, let's move over to the player side, because that's the fun side, Tim. Let's have a little fun. Our guy Pete Alonso is going to be looking over for a new contract. He's got his guy Scott Boras. Realistically, with the numbers that you hear brewing around, what kind of contract do you think that the Mets and Pete Alonso could come to an agreement on?
Well, I should preface the answer by saying I do not anticipate that they will come to an extension. Is that possible? Sure. Boras clients do that every so often. But I think Pete Alonso all along has had his eye on free agency, even before switching to Scott Boras.
Really?
So I think he's comfortable betting on himself, playing out the year. Now, if the Mets come up and say, "Hey, here's $250 million," the guy can change his mind. But I anticipate that we'll be talking about this at this time next year. Pete Alonso reaching free agency, and ultimately, I think the Mets do keep him, because Steve Cohen has shown he's a smart guy, does the obvious things when they're presented to him, and keeping Pete Alonso is the obvious right thing. So I do think they'll get there eventually. As far as what kind of contract, of course it'll depend on what kind of 2024 Pete Alonso has, but it's going to be, I would think, 7 to 9 years, more than $200 million. That's certainly where Alonso is shooting, I'm sure he's shooting well beyond $200 million.
Right.
But realistically, for a first baseman who's going to be 30 years old when he's a free agent, that would be a heck of a haul for him. So he's shooting high, that's for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds about right for him. Now, to keep the conversation internal for a moment with this group, the younger guys who we kind of hit on the developmental process earlier, but the younger guys had various lengths of auditions at certain points this past season for the Mets. Out of the Alvarezes and the Beattys and guys who fit that description, What did you make of them in 2023? Who could you see having a legitimate impact on what the Mets are trying to do in 24?
This is one of the most difficult things that David Stearns has to figure out this offseason. Which of these three guys, Beatty, Vientos, Mauricio, can you rely on? Or
Right.
which of them do you want to give a full-time shot in 2024 out of the gate? And it's hard because Beatty was the highest regarded prospect of these three, and he looked awful.
Yeah.
Like, he was so bad and so in his head that they sent him down in August. He came back. He was a little better in September, but not that
much
better.
No.
And so does all of that ability and ceiling and prospect status disappear after one bad year? Not totally. It's diminished, yes, but if you thought so highly of him before, I would think you still think highly of him now to a degree. I actually believe more so in Vientos as a player relative to what they are. I don't think Mark Vientos should be the full-time third baseman because I'm not sure he can play defense at any position right now.
Yeah.
But if you see Beatty as a third baseman and Vientos as a DH, and you're choosing to pick one of them as on your roster, I would pick Vientos as the DH because when he finally played regularly in September, late August and September, came back from the injured list, he played well. He hits the ball, and I'm not exaggerating here, he hits the ball literally harder than any other Met, harder than Alonso, harder than Nimmo. The exit velocity and the strength is there. Of course, it's just a matter of making sure he makes contact enough for that to matter. Which he did once he played regularly and was able to get into a groove. So if the Mets just rolled with Vientos as their DH to open next season, that would make perfect sense to me. Mauricio is another tough one. He didn't have too long of an audition, and it was another situation where you saw some pretty crazy flashes of the offensive ability, even if the ultimate numbers weren't that impressive.
Right.
But it's a big defensive question mark where, okay, maybe he can play second base. You move McNeil elsewhere. McNeil has shown he can do that. But what can he hold his own defensively? I don't know that the Mets really got that question answered this past season. So it's tough. So good luck to David Stearns on that.
Yeah, well, and look, Tim, before we let you go, the last thing, and we talked about it yesterday a little bit, David Stearns, I mean, he is stocked with pitching right now. I mean, you have Kodai Senga and what are they going to do for pitching next year, or is Senga pitching every day?
So I initially, I have to be honest, did not pick up on your sarcasm. I thought, are they stocked on pitching? What the heck? But yeah, that's a good point by you. They have two starting pitchers under contract, Senga and Quintana.
Ooh.
So I view it as they need at least two and maybe three starting pitchers. Yamamoto, the guy coming from Japan, lots of hype. Mets fans, at least from what I can tell on Twitter, which I try not to draw conclusions on, really want Yamamoto, but guess what? So do the Yankees and their fans, and so do the Red Sox and their fans, and so does every big market with the need for pitching, which is virtually everybody. So, yes, Yamamoto would be a great addition for the Mets. What's good about him? So, all right, so I guess this has to come in the context of the Mets aren't going to spend quite as big as they did in the recent past.
Right.
The exception to that would be Yamamoto because he's only 25 years old, and if you give him $200 million thereabouts, then you can tolerate that because he's 25. If they don't get Yamamoto, I really don't think they're going to be in on Blake Snell, Aaron Nola, the other best pitchers available, because those guys are older, and that's the sort of deal the Mets want to avoid right now. Guaranteeing a guy $30 million into his mid and late 30s. That did not work out for them in a couple of recent cases. So
we've seen that.
Yamamoto's the one, and if they miss on Yamamoto, then they're going to have to try to fill it out with some more mid-tier options. And then it's like, fish in a barrel pretty much. So it could be anybody at that point. And then that's just the rotation. Never mind, the bullpen has about maybe 2 or 3 reliable pitchers and then a bunch of question marks. So much like last year, the Mets are going to have to do a lot of work in the bullpen, and of course a lot of work in the rotation as well. So I think the Mets need a hitter, but obviously the pitching is going to have to be a priority this offseason.
It definitely has to be a priority because I don't see any of it. And Quintana is such a big question mark, but we'll see. I mean, David Stearns is certainly going to have his work cut out for him. Wouldn't Yankee fans love to see Jordan Montgomery in Queens shutting people down from the left side? I don't know. I would. That's a name.
After one of his hands is being weighed down by the ring that he now has, whole thing.
Exactly. That would go over so well. He's our guy, Tim Healey. He covers the New York Mets and Major League Baseball for Newsday. You can read all of his coverage at newsday.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Tim B. Healey and donate to him. He's running the New York City Marathon. It's for an awesome cause. Go to his Twitter page and donate at Tim B. Healey. And we're psyched for you, dude. Good luck on Sunday, and hopefully the weather's supposed to be perfect, right?
Pretty much. Highs in the low 60s, so you can't ask for much more than that.
Oh, no.
Perfect.
So when they're right there in the front, we should be watching for you. You have a chance to win.
Yeah, when the top guy is coming at 2 hours, give me another 2 hours or so.
Okay, so we'll know we can get up, grab a snack, and then we'll be back and ready to roll.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
hey, man,
snacks.
Just running is winning. And so that's your
exactly.
total winner for us.